This is Tiger Creek Preserve, August 15th, 2015. I'm in the management area we call Foonstein area. Foonstein 7 on the ridge on the west side of Heron Pond. I'm looking down at Heron Pond here, and I'm on the hiking trail. And I'm just going to walk through the Xeric hammock here. Sorry about that, I went a little too fast. Just to show the condition of the sandhill in this area. So this area's been burned probably 3 or 4 times, but fire has not had a significant effect on the sand live oaks here, so it's still an oak dominated Xeric hammock. These oaks range in diameter from 3 inches to 6 inches probably, and they're about 20 feet tall, so somewhat stunted, I'd say. So even after 3 rounds, at least 3 rounds of burning, we just haven't been able to get fire to burn very hot on this ridge. And this ridge also has very few pines, so that fuel has been removed. It is not available when we do the burning. There are clumps of palmettos, such as over here, but they're quite small, and we still have probably 75% canopy cover of sand live oaks here. It's actually quite a nice environment, especially for hiking in the summer like it is now. Here's some larger sand live oaks, probably 10 inches at the base, at breast height as well. So the question is, should we try harder to return this to scrubby flatwoods and sandhill, as we've done in other parts of the preserve? And that could mean cutting with chainsaws, girdling, herbiciding, or I suppose chipping. I think it's too big to roller chop. And you'll notice the ground doesn't have much grass cover, grass component. See a lot of deer moss, which is an indication that these areas did not actually receive fire in the last several rounds of burning, because wherever it burns, deer moss is consumed, and it takes a long time for it to get noticeable again. These clumps, being the size they are, tells me, for example right here, these clumps tell me it's probably been 20 or 30 years since fire has actually gotten to that spot right there. And you can see, even with that much time, there's not very much accumulation of flammable litter on the ground. Here's some bare sand right here. So this is just the current condition in the sandhill community. And I say sandhill because there is a turkey oak right over here. It's my indicator species that I'm in sandhill. And these Xeric hammocks, when we burn them, frequently, they do return to open sandhill, and the sand live oaks tend to move down into the ground layer and become a shrub. And if we continue burning, they tend to drop out, die out completely, or at least they reduce in numbers dramatically. And then if the area is lower in elevation, usually on the side slope of these sandhills, when we burn it frequently, it will end up becoming scrubby flatwoods. So until you burn it, you can't always tell if a Xeric hammock is scrubby flatwoods or Xeric hammock. But the occurrence of turkey oak is a very good indicator that the Xeric hammock you're in will convert to the sandhill. And now just a little farther along the trail, the Heron Pond Loop Trail, we come to an area where there is or was one lone pine, and you see how very open it is around the pine tree. And this is not a coincidence, of course. Wherever there are pines, we have restoration with fire. The additional fuel, very flammable fuel of the longleaf pine, provides adequate heat to kill most competing vegetation underneath and near the tree. And that's what's happened in this case. We have a very open sandhill condition, and unfortunately this tree for some reason died, and you can see, and so this area will probably begin reverting back to Xeric hammock over time with the loss of the pine needles providing the additional fuel. So as we continue down the trail, you can see there's still areas of deer moss where fire has not gotten to. And then we come to another area where there's one lone pine tree. This one healthy and in good condition. And I don't know if it'll show up well or not, but here is an area just a little bit larger than the size of the tree ring of open habitat around this tree, just like the other one. And then all surrounding this tree, outside the drip line where fire didn't burn as hot, it is surrounded by Xeric hammock. So where we have a pine tree, we have restoration with fire, and where we don't, the process is much slower. Now we have many places where we have no pine trees, and we have had success with fire, restoring it back to open habitat. But this is just an example of where we have not been successful. So now further down the trail, we come to an area where there's a group of pines. They're not closely spaced, but they're close enough to show the influence of more than one pine tree in restoring habitat. Here's one pine, the most uphill one that I see, and you can see underneath it all the oaks have dropped down into the ground cover, and as you get farther away, there's the Xeric hammock is intact. And then I hope the light isn't too bad here, but as we look downhill toward Heron Pond, there's a group of 3 or 4 pine trees, and you can see how much more open this area is than the surrounding Xeric habitat. And this is the result of fire getting more momentum due to the effects of several sources of flammability. And also this is the uphill gradient, which helps fire move and gain intensity by moving uphill. So when we light at the bottom of this hill, it helps. And these side hills seem to burn better than the tops and the back side. So depending on the wind direction, certain areas get restored quicker than others, especially if we have to use the same wind all the time because of smoke constraints or other holding issues. And of course the question that we continually ask ourselves is, what did these hilltops and ridges look like before they were timbered and cattle grazed on them, and who knows what other impacts? Did they look just like this? It's possible. Or were they much more open and pine and wiregrass dominated? If you look here, I'm not sure you can see this too well, but there are fairly large clumps of wiregrass here, and the existence of wiregrass is a clue that fire was certainly a player in shaping what was here. And it is questionable whether it would be here if this was shady 100% or 75% canopy cover, if it would have ever gotten established here. I don't know if that for sure. But one thing that I have noticed that I think has had an effect on this habitat, which is not one of the ones I mentioned already, but it's the existence of feral hogs. And you may not notice it, but this is some hog damage right here in between all these wiregrass clumps. It's probably several weeks old, and there's some more scattered through here. And I think this is an intermittent activity of the hogs. They probably only come up here seasonally. I don't know what they're looking for, but they do root up the wiregrass and other things, of course. That's another patch right there. And all this area here, although you won't be able to tell it, I can see is disturbed by hog rooting. And I think while this is not catastrophic at any one time, I think over a century or more that this is a significant alteration to the ground cover. It's something that we very rarely actually observe hog sign in Sandhill, but occasionally there is widespread damage and rooting in habitat like this. And then you come back to that area a year later and you wouldn't know that hogs had ever been there rooting. So this may explain the patchy nature of wiregrass on these hillsides. It may not. But you don't typically in healthy sandhill see just isolated clumps of wiregrass interspersed with these areas of deer moss like this. So this little area is an example of what I would call the third stage of restoration with fire alone in Xeric Hammock. So in the background we still have the unaffected sand live oaks, and then here in the foreground we have a mid-layer of dead sand live oaks that were killed in the last fire that was done, and then below them we have the resprouts coming back from the ground after these shrubs were top killed. So this area was originally mature Xeric hammock with large sand live oaks, 6-inch trunks. Here's one right here, the remains of it. And we killed that with, let's say, the first fire. And then 3 or 5 years later we came back and burned this area again, and that sand live oak had resprouted all these 8 to 10 foot tall saplings, and when we burned at that time the fire killed them, and then now they're coming back again. They're resprouting prolifically and have a dominant cover of the ground cover all over this area. And now if we come back and burn this again, the fourth stage of burning, let's say probably 4 burns, and if we do it soon enough, within 3 or 4 years, the fire will have sapped these resprouts, and many of them won't come back, and it will be much thinner percent cover of sand live oaks in this area. So fire regime is all important in actually creating habitat, more than an individual burn, of course. And that's why it takes a continued program of burning over many years for managers to shape habitat the way they want it. And that's pretty much what we do. We're not recreating a natural system. We're creating the habitat in our own mind's image. Now from this area, the trail comes back out onto Heron Pond, and you can see along the edge of the pond it is much more open. Oops, I fell on some hog rooting there. And it is much more open because it's a flatwoods band, which all our seasonal ponds have a band of flatwoods around the edge of them, and these bands of flatwoods are totally dominated by palmetto, and palmetto is so flammable that they're very easy to restore, quote unquote, restore these areas to open flatwoods, assuming that's what they were. And you'll notice there are no pines there, and there used to be pines there when we first started burning this, and it was all grown up in tall oaks. It was a mesic hammock. There was I remember there was quite a few longleaf pines here, and the reason they're not there now is because those first fires burned so intensely, and there's so much accumulation of fuel around those pine trees, and we didn't burn it in wet enough conditions to save the pines or keep the pines from being killed by the heat, that we lost all the pines in this area. And in many of our flatwoods, we lost a lot of our pines in the first rounds of burning. And if I can continue around this way, you'll see farther to the west, the flatwoods continues, and it is still pine dominated, which is great. However, we did lose an important component of the flatwoods in this one part here. Often around these pond edges, the fire does get really hot, and it's hard to save the pines when the fire regime has gotten way out of whack. And in flatwoods, the frequency of fire is extremely important because of the fast accumulation of fuels. If you get outside the range of 1 to 4 years in flatwoods, it's going to be hard to burn it successfully so that you maintain the pine canopy.